Hey guys, it's Yoko. Welcome back to my channel. Sorry I didn't upload last week. I was just being so lazy. So the other day, a Korean American model slash actress, Kiko Mizuhara, picked up a fight on Twitter, and oh boy, the world says enough is enough. We're done with racism. But here in Japan, people are not happy with this beautiful model slash actress being who she is, basically because of her nationality. Yes, you heard it right. As you probably know, almost every Japanese people are Asian. I said almost. Take the recent racial composition in New York City. Asian people take up 13.95% of the population. In Tokyo, you probably see a lot of non-Asian people, probably more than 14% or around, but not the other way around. And where I live, it's super rare to run into non-Asian people, let alone health food. And Kiko is Korean American who grew up in Japan and doesn't have Japanese citizenship. But her mother tongue is Japanese. She's known worldwide as a Japanese model because of a Japanese name and the fact that she's based in Japan. And here's what happened. One Twitter user said in the now deleted tweet, Kiko Mizuhara is not Japanese citizen, right? If she does anything further, I want her to stop act like one. How she presents herself like representation of Japan feels wrong given her nationality. And Miss Kiko replied, when did I act like one? Is there any problem if I don't have Japanese citizenship? I grew up and received education in Japan for 29 years. I don't know what seems to be the problem here. And apparently, some people have lots of problems with her reply. Your name, Kiko Mizuhara, says you're Japanese. If you don't like it, name yourself for the criticism. Stop using a Japanese name. You should go by your real name, Audrey Daniel. Why don't you go by your real name at least? What's the problem? Is your name. Please make sure your stage name says you're Korean without no doubt. Your thinking process is definitely not Japanese, but your name sounds pretty much Japanese, so why don't you just change your name? I have no complaints if you stop using the stage name and start using your own. So these people are saying, if you don't like to be judged for acting like Japanese, you should change your name, even though her mother tongue is Japanese. There's more. I don't care if you act like Japanese or not, but don't say anything about Japan. What's the problem is you badmouth Japan abroad. No, it's not a problem if you love Japan. If you can identify yourself as Japanese and speak for us, even if one has Japanese citizenship, if he or she shows contempt for Japan, that will be troublesome, especially when this person is foreigner. So you're saying if you're a Japanese citizen and have a Japanese name, you should love Japan without question and don't get to criticize about it. And if you're not Japanese, you don't get to say anything at all? I knew you were not Japanese citizen. Glad to hear it from you. Kent Gilbert states his opinion as a foreigner, as you can tell by his name. In that case, we can take them as one of foreigners' opinions, but that's not the point here. Showing contempt for Japanese people, anti-Japanese activities, and intervention on internal matters need to be stopped. If she has a name such as Yoan, Sonin, or Kim, she wouldn't have faced this backlash because if she has a Korean name, her opinions will be recognized as foreigners by both Japanese people and others. It doesn't matter where you're from, but you need to clarify your nationality to put out your opinions. Also, if that person is friendly to Japan, I think they will be welcome no matter where they're from. So this person is saying, you don't get to criticize Japan if you're Japanese, but you can if you're a foreigner. Also, intervention on internal matters is nothing an individual can do to a country. Having some opinions on how one country deals with their matters is nothing that. It's merely having opinions, and I don't think your nationality matters. Nationalities do matter. I don't want her to talk about Japan as if she was Japanese. Criticism is inevitable as long as she has a Japanese name. If she wants to criticize Japan so much, she should be naturalized. Kiko, you asking would that be a problem if I don't have Japanese citizenship doesn't sit right for us living as Japanese. If you go by a Japanese name on media, you need to be sympathetic towards audience rather than putting your ideology first. So this person is saying, if you use a Japanese name or have a Japanese name and be a public figure, how you want to live doesn't matter, but how you perceived by people does. Also, this person is not happy about the fact that Kiko spoke up. I mean, it's old school Japanese. It's not about what she says, but the fact this person is speaking up is quite upsetting. I mean, how un-Japanese, right? You think these are disgusting enough, but there's more. Some people are not happy with the reply and started to leave comments on the photos Kiko did for a fashion magazine abroad and criticize her. You sure don't act like Japanese. If you're Japanese, you shouldn't be able to do this. I don't know why you would do this. I'm sure you're making fun of Japanese culture. You think how you look in this picture is beautiful? Do it in other countries. Disgusting. So ill-mannered. Stop going by Japanese name. Sitting on a table should be a no in every culture. I don't see any Japaneseness in it, no matter how Japanese the studio looks. I only see a Korean hooker opening her legs on a table. This kind of style might be popular among a certain community though. It's unacceptable from a Japanese person's perspective. Really? I think this is beautiful. There's hint of sensuality, but not overly, at least to my eyes. Yes, I was born and raised in Japan. I have a Japanese name and Japanese citizenship, but I find this beautiful. And nothing I see in this is beyond art. And what do you mean by Japaneseness exactly? What I sense here is you don't want to be perceived as sensually, even slightly a bit. But you know what I got told in Paris when I first said I'm Japanese? Oh, you're Japanese. I love Japan, especially anime and porn. Well, I met these people on Tinder, so that explains the quality of the conversation. But I think this is quite honest impression. Sadly, those are what Japan is known for the most. I know a lot of Japanese women would not be happy with foreigners assuming all Japanese women are like that. And are you gonna accuse those porn actresses for how they portray themselves in the videos? Because from what I understood, they should be the one to be accused for the wrong impression of Japan, no? Don't get me wrong, I'm not encouraging you to actually accuse them. I'm sure they have their reasons to choose that job. Porn definitely has influence, but it's not the only one to blame. We all should be educated to engage in intimacy the right way. What I'm trying to say is, whatever Japaneseness you want to put out outside Japan, accusing Kiko for what she's done, which is merely an art to me, doesn't help it come through. It's an irony that the last image of Japan you want to portray is the one the most known in the world, spread by the very Japanese ones, and not the one you're accusing for acting like one. Too harsh? Oh, I'm just getting there. Kiko grew up and received education in Japan for 29 years. And you walked on tatami with your shoes on? I know stepping on tatami with your shoes on is a huge no-no. I grew up here. Duh. I have been to some tea ceremonies. There are lots of rules of how to behave during the ceremony. So I know you need to have utmost respect for the tradition. But they're fashion photos, for God's sake. Those looks wouldn't be complete without those shoes. And those shoes must have been brand new. And don't you think, if this photo shoot is inappropriate, whoever owns this place would have called it out, not you? Did Kiko receive any message from whoever owns this place? I briefly googled, nothing came up. I often talk about what I disagree about Japan on this channel, but every time I talk about it, some people get furious and start attacking my personality. Apparently they believe that Japan is the greatest country, and if you don't love it when you're Japanese, you're cray-cray and deserve to be attacked. If I point at some things that need some improvements, they just accuse me for being not Japanese enough to appreciate it. Apparently, for them, we have to agree on everything we share just because we were born and raised in the same country. I know they're just the ones with extreme nationalism and they're not Japanese people as a whole, but they're the factor of Japan I'm not a big fan of, and I think I have every right to criticize them for being so narrow-minded and outdated. I always get told I'm not like Japanese people, by both Japanese people and non-Japanese people. And when non-Japanese people tell me that, it's just stereotypes, so sometimes they don't describe certain people accurately. But when Japanese people call out somebody for their less Japanese behavior, they're the shame of the country. I want to ask these people, what is Japaneseness? What makes you Japanese? And what is wrong if you don't apply to that? I know a Chinese guy who was born and raised in Japan, and his parents are Chinese, they speak Chinese, but he doesn't understand it. He only speaks Japanese and received education in Japan, but he doesn't have Japanese passport. Yes, his family name sounds like Chinese, but if I hadn't known his name, I couldn't have told he was Chinese. He sounds perfectly like Japanese. He says he loves Japan, probably more than some random Japanese person does, but his passport says he's Chinese. So he was born and raised in Japan, and he looks and sounds exactly like Japanese, but his nationality is not. Do you still see him as a Chinese person because his passport says so? I also know a Taiwanese girl who had naturalized 16 years ago. She naturalized, so she has Japanese citizenship. But she has some accent in Japanese, so a lot of people would assume she is Taiwanese or Chinese, despite the fact she is Japanese. So she's Japanese on a paper, but you can tell that Japanese is not her mother tongue, and she speaks both Japanese and Chinese. She received education in both Taiwan and Japan. Put aside what she identifies herself as. How would you see her? Do you see her as a Japanese person, or her accent would stop you from seeing her as a Japanese person? I'm Japanese, born and raised in Japan. Japanese is my mother tongue. I have a Japanese name, Japanese citizenship, and both of my parents are Japanese. But my behavior is not. I speak up when I feel something is done wrongly. So I want to ask you, what makes a person Japanese? What's the quality of being Japanese? Is it citizenship? Your name? Fluency in the language? Your face? Your blood? What makes you Japanese? Let me know in the comments. See you guys in the next video.